Thanks for watching. This is kind of a time traveling video because I'm thinking that by the time you see this, I have already pretended that Losi has come out with a new vehicle, which is the Polarey, Dune Rey, whatever I wanted to call it. Which is of course something that I cooked up myself, and in this video I'm going to show you how I did it, or how I'm doing it rather, because I'm still very much in the process of figuring some stuff out. I still need to paint everything, but I also made a lot of progress, and I think there is actually plenty to tell already. How this came to be is, that's also why it's flipped on its roof right now. I had my Hammer Rey standing upside down to fit some new wheels and tires from Spec RC. These rims and these tires are the Mickey Thompson Baja Pro X tires from Proline. And as it was standing upside down, I looked at it and I'm like, this wheelbase is pretty much perfect to build a really cool side-by-side seater. And that's also something that I really wanted to do for a long time. Back in the day, I built the Yeti XXL, which was a 4-seater side-by-side type of racer, with like twin motors and everything. Now this thing is not going to be anything crazy. I think actually that this Polarey, because I think that's what we're going to go with, is going to be something that you are able to replicate rather easy yourself. So as this Hammer Rey was standing on his roof with that really cool Casey Curry trophy Jeep body, I decided to have a little test fit with my Arrma FireTeam cage and body, and it turns out that that fits rather well. So this is the stock body with the stock cage, and you will see that there are some tiny modifications needed in order for it to actually fit, but overall the shape and especially the scale of it is very good. Now, but there's a few things about this FireTeam concept that I don't really like. That's the soldiers that are sitting inside with their weapons, stuff like that. I think that's also what a lot of people had problems with, making that transition between, I guess, RC on one side and then kind of like a gaming type of vibe on the other end. And especially over here in Europe, we're not that used to weapons being super common. So I think with that it fell a bit flat. But in the parts list that is that cage and body and also that entire truck, there's so much potential and there's so much good stuff going on that I just want to highlight what is possible if you just put your mind to it and get a tiny bit creative. Now, what I needed to do first was, of course, get this trophy Jeep body off, which is rather simple. So you got 8 screws in the bottom over here, you got 2 in the front. Then you can lift most of the thing off already, and then there's 4 screws in the back that go into the rear shock tower. So there's 2 big struts in the back that keep those twin shocks in place that you have on either side, and those you do need to unbolt. But once you do, you will find that the only thing still holding it in place is the sway bar. Sway bar also is really easy to remove. You just pop it out. This is not a functioning sway bar, so you can see that the actual sway bar sits way more in front. I'm fully aware that if you have a full-size side-by-side seater, it would not have a solid rear axle, but it would have this look because the suspension arms in the back are also a bit trailed. And if you just want to nail that look, I think going with a solid rear axle vehicle is actually the ticket. I hope this concept sort of proves it. What I needed to do is I needed to make an adapter plate in the bottom to make sure that I could put the cage on the chassis. That was a tiny bit of figuring out, but I made that work. I did not have enough material to machine what I needed to machine, because I used all of my Delrin in my last project, which was my Axial SCX6 Gladiator. I'm not sure if you saw that video series in which I machined an entire canopy, but that one took a ton of material. So I was a bit hurting for materials in this one, since I didn't want it to take weeks and weeks upon me receiving some new acetal or Delrin. So what I did is I decided to machine these 2 parts from HDPE. I'll make sure that you see close-ups of these parts. And HDPE is what you would find in cutting boards, and I have a kitchen full of cutting boards. I took one that was already used, so I'm not sure what type of vegetables have been made on this cutting board prior, but it is really easy to machine it. It also has some sort of mechanical strength to it, so if you want to tap a screw into it, using HDPE is fantastic. It's like a polyethylene. Really nice to machine, works really well, and it's plenty strong. It keeps its shape, and for this project it was absolutely perfect to just use that. I did have two small pieces of a Delrin that I could machine into these two braces in the back, because you do need to toughen up those rear shock towers in order for the truck to have enough structural integrity. But I'm kind of rushing ahead over here. What I needed to do first was I needed to make sure that the body aligned up correctly for the wheels to not interfere with any of the cage and the body. In order to do that, I needed to cut two struts off the back of the cage, because this usually continues a bit further up. And then you also have in the back, if I just grab the FireTeam body real quick, you have two struts in the back, and then in the back you also have these body panels coming in. You can't use that if you want to build it on this Hammer Rey chassis. So all of this needed to go. These two struts also needed to be chopped out. But once you do that, you have plenty of liberty to actually cycle those two double shocks and everything else inside of the cage. So that was one thing that I needed to tackle. I also wanted to keep these four connecting points in the bottom. So those as well I machined into those two HDPE plates that keep it onto the chassis. And in order to secure them, I used Proline body, what do you call them, body screws. So those two rivets per side to connect it to those plates. I hope that makes sense. I'll make sure that you see a close-up of that as well. In order to make that not interfere with anything over here, I needed to trim a tiny bit off the interior panel, but nothing drastic. And then it went to get it pretty easy. The front bumper is just woven into the chassis, so I disconnected it really quickly, took some screws out, just pulled the cage of the FireTeam around that front bumper, put everything back together, and that worked really nicely. I think this looks like it could actually be stock, so this is a really great dimensional look for it. So all of the proportions are great. The way that the shocks sit in there is fantastic. I like the way that those front arms look in there. The wheels, they cycle freely, also on full suspension compression. There's no interference. So with all of that, I was really happy. In the back as well, after chopping out those body panels, nothing interferes. Suspension cycles completely freely, so that as well is really good. I needed to remove the ESC from the chassis, so I'm not sure if I'm going to put that on the interior panel or if I'm going to cut out a gap so I can position it on the chassis and take the body on and off a bit easier than I otherwise would be able to. Also, there's no interference in getting the battery in and out, since the Hammer Rey has that battery opening in the back over here, so you don't need to take the body off at all. So that's also great. You don't really need to be inside of this chassis for maintenance or anything like it. And if you do want to, for example, drop out the motor or have a look at your pinion gear, you can just do that from the bottom. So there's a lot of stuff over here that you can just keep intact if you want to run the truck and just keep it going, to put it like that. Another thing was I wanted these two struts in the back over here. I wanted this to connect then to the FireTeam cage, but also to those shock towers, just to get that extra strength. And I wanted it to look a tiny bit like it could be factory made. So I hope I nailed that. I'm gonna leave that up for you to decide. So I wanted to incorporate a couple of design elements just to make it look a tiny bit more engineered. So I machined an opening in there. I did all of that on my X-Carve. That's the CNC machine that I have under my staircase. Bolted it up, and all of that worked out pretty nicely. Then the last parts that I needed to machine were these doors. I do not have any type of vacuum forming stuff for Lexan, so this again is polyethylene, 1 millimeter thick, really easy to machine. It is clear, so it has a protective film on there currently. I hope that my Lexan paint will stick to it, but we will figure that out. If not, I just need to make sure that I can get my hands on some Lexan in order to redo this. In designing these doors, I wanted to have a separate front door that extends a tiny bit beyond this B-pillar over here, just to make it look a bit more stretched and a bit more proportionate. I think that worked out pretty well too. I also wanted to expose those twin rear shocks just because that's a really cool technical aspect of this truck, and to highlight that a tiny bit by machining an opening and giving you an extra look through, I think that works really well. I also wanted to open up these doors in the places where you have that bar going on in that cage, just well, again, to give you something else to look at, make it a bit more three-dimensional. And then the front door sits over what is essentially one big panel stretching all the way to the front, but it gives you well, again, you know, a bit more to look at and a bit more detail for the lack of me having any type of vacuum forming stuff over here. So this is pretty easy to do, not really that complicated. I think it looks really promising so far, so this is one of the projects that I'm really the most excited about in more recent times. So that's also why I wanted to kind of launch it and trick you guys and girls into thinking that perhaps there's a new Losi. I always struggle on getting stuff in with like the rest of the guys, so I can have some actual good, decent time ahead of a release to do some filming and some shooting and really gather my thoughts to give you a good idea of what a new truck is about. But in this case, nobody has this, so I'm the first to have it. I hope something like this perhaps will come out at some point, because I think there's a lot of potential in reaching another market over here. The last thing that I really don't like about this interior panel are these heads. So these as well, these are coming off. And then I robbed Casey Curry and his co-driver of their heads in the Hammer Rey. I think this helmet is actually more proportionate. So these FireTeam helmets or faces, those are going. And then these Casey Curry helmets are going in. Again, these are a bit bigger, but I think that right now the driver and the passenger, they're a bit too broad-shouldered as well. Yes, there is such a thing as too broad-shouldered. So I want them to make a bit friendlier in their appearance and a bit less cartoonish, and these helmets are definitely going to help with that. That way I have a pretty realistic looking driver and a navigator, and this would look like something that you would perhaps take up to Moab or to King of the Hammers, or like some sort of Baja racing series. I'm not sure yet if I'm going to perhaps, or to Glamis. I'm not sure yet if I'm going to put a spare wheel on here. This would be a perfect truck to put some of the Dumont tires, I believe they're called, for the Arrma Mojave on. I would have to have some different wheel hexes, but again, you know, there's tons of possibilities over here. I think it really looks like a Polaris RZR. You could of course also interpret it as like a Can-Am, I guess, like a Maverick, but I'm thinking the front looks more like a Polaris than anything else. So that's also how I'm going to paint it up. This is one of the kind of rare occasions, I guess, where you see a project halfway through, and I just wanted to kind of run you through it and showcase what I've done so far, just because there's so much thought and detail that goes into a build like this that it's really easy for me to lose track of it, and it kind of, for lack of better wording, cripples my video making process, because at some point I'm so far ahead in the build and I have so many ideas that I kind of stiffen up completely and paralyze the whole filming process. So as well in this video, if I'm a tiny bit incoherent, perhaps please forgive me, but that's just my enthusiasm. I still have a couple of things to button up, like for example in the front over here, I want to get rid of this body mounting hole. Then I want to test fit everything one last time before giving this a quick wash, and then painting it up and then turning it into what you have perhaps already seen. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think of these type of videos as well, because I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. And if you have any questions or comments, please let me know in the comment section. If you have not subscribed yet, please do. Airplane going over. I hope you don't hear that. And I will see you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.
Back on.